The Werewolf Community Theater, you may have noticed the theme, is building a small community center and stage space for the nighttime productions. The space is a simple structural concept, one tall multi-purpose space with two smaller side spaces on two of the sides to support the productions. On the following floor plans, sketch the required structural framing plan using masonry bearing walls, beams, columns, joists, and structural decking. The maximum deck span is 5 feet. The maximum joist span is 30 feet. The maximum beam span is 45 feet. Doors need a steel lintel when part of a masonry bearing wall. Columns can be put into any existing wall or window wall. You may not add new walls. Okay, so note down here, any wall on the framing plan can be either a masonry bearing wall or a beam column frame. It's your choice depending on what you think makes the most sense for that portion of the building. And it can be mixed. You can have part of the building be masonry and part of the building be a steel beam column frame. Most masonry buildings are going to be some combination. But do not overstructure the building. Try to keep it economical and simple. So that means things like if it says that the maximum deck span is 5 feet, like it does right here, that means the joists should be 5 feet apart from each other. Just because it's a you're trying to be extra careful, you don't want to suddenly make those things 3 feet apart from each other just to show that you're smart and careful. If it tells you that the max is 5, do it at the max, keep it nice and economical. It's one of the things that the structural layout is looking for you to know, is that it should be a simple and straightforward and economical process. So I gave you a little 3D look here, and we're kind of cheating with this. Because this is kind of the whole game of this one, is that what you're going to see, I'm going to jump forward here for a second, are two plans. So there's the lower level plan. So here we have the main multi-purpose space, the little stage area, a little back of house zone, and then a concessions area, an entrance in, a second egress out, window wall over here. And then if we look at the upper level, well, we can see the roof and the roof. Then we see the space below, which is that multi-purpose space. So it's just a one-story building, but we see is these two different floor areas. So we will be seeing it on the vignette as straightforward floor plans. The reason I showed it this way is I wanted you to start thinking about it as 3D, because quite literally, 60% of this exam of this vignette is, do you realize that if you have a beam here, let's say, and a joist structure there, and a joist structure here, that I need another beam right there. So in plan, if I'm looking straight down, this beam and this beam are right on top of each other. So when you read this and then you look at that set of floor plans, you should realize that there are two sets of structure, one for each different height of the roof. Now, like I said, this is not a real building. It doesn't even show any slope in the roof. It doesn't show all sorts of other things that you would normally be thinking about for this kind of thing. That's not what it's about. It's really just trying to get at, if you see something like this, can you picture it in 3D and understand that there needs to be multiple levels of structure? So, am I going to use bearing walls or am I going to use beam and column? Well, I can use anything I want, but I'm probably not going to use bearing walls in a situation where I'm going to have big openings. So I probably don't want to put a bearing wall in this wall. I probably don't, where the stage open is, I'm probably not going to put a bearing wall. That just doesn't make any sense. I'm going to have a bearing wall within this big opening in it. It doesn't follow. And then this wall, I probably don't want to use as a bearing wall, because first of all, it's got this big opening right here, but it also has this big clear story opening up above it. So Do I want to put bearing walls in? Sure, I can put bearing. Why don't I make this a bearing wall? And maybe I make this a bearing wall, because it's pretty straightforward. And then we'll talk about this one in a minute. So because I have a bearing wall with a door, it means I have to show that there's a lintel there. This one, there's no doors or openings in it, so that one's okay. And now we're going to start thinking about how the roof structure is going to work. So I'm going to show the upper roof structure on the upper plan and the two lower roof structures on this lower plan. And I'm going to just say, all right, I've got a joist here, and then every 5 feet, I'm just kind of roughing it here. And then I got one at the end. And I'm going to say that these have to be held up on a beam. So there's a column there, and there's a column there. And if we take a look at the spans, we might decide to break up that overall span. So I might make that 2 different beams. I probably don't need to make it 3. That would probably be more than necessary. I've got the bearing wall over here. I've got the beam and column over here. I've got the joists. And then if the joists are running this direction, that means the decking is running that direction. So the decking is spanning, going perpendicular across those joists. The joists are spanning, in this case, from bearing wall to beam. The beam is spanning from column to column and column to column. So everything is structured there. So now I could either do the same direction here and make this a bearing wall, or I could turn the direction the other way and make this a bearing wall. It's really sort of up to us. What do we feel like doing here? How about, why don't let's turn it. So there's a joist, there's another joist, another joist, another joist. And then I'm going to put a column and a column and a beam and a beam. And I'm going to make this a bearing wall. So I've now got this structured. Now this particular one has to have the decking go the other direction because it has to span across those joists. All right, and then there's going to be a beam there. So now I get up to this upper level, and I can go any direction that I want. So I have a beam here, I have a beam here, a column there and a column there. So I could take this right there, that moment right there. I'm going to put it in right spot right there and right there. And I can put a beam in right across there, put a column in, and then I could run the joists that way. That's totally reasonable. Let's think about it the other way as well. I could also have this run across there, and then have the joists run this way. The reason that I'm putting that beam in at all is because if I start looking at this number, I'm going to be very clearly either direction I go here, I'm going to be longer than the 30-foot maximum for the joist span. So I need to break it up somehow. So I'm putting a beam across in this case. That won't necessarily be the case for your project, but you can see why I would have to do that. Let's just do it that way. And then here I've got the bearing wall, and I'm picking up that beam on that bearing wall. And then I've got the joists spanning on either side. What do those joists bear into? Well, they bear into this beam right here. So everything is structured. The decking is going that way. We've got this roof structured and this roof structured, and we've got the main roof structured. We've got bearing walls only in locations where they're meaningful. In this case, I probably could have gotten away with not making this a bearing wall and just putting a column there and then making sure that that column showed up on the lower level. That probably would have been smarter, but you know, just trying to show a couple different ways of approaching it. So we have all of these things going, and like I said, half of the point of all of this is just so that you see that there's a beam right there that's at the height of this lower roof, and there's a beam right in that exact same location that's at the height of the upper roof. So there's one right on top of the other, which is why we have to show a lower level and an upper level. And that is what they're looking to make sure that you have picked up. So then you just got to go through and make sure, all right, if I showed a column up here, it better make sense going all the way through, or it's sitting on top of a bearing wall. Everything sort of follows through. The decking reaches to all of the joists. The joists reach from beam to beam or to a bearing wall. The beams reach from column to column or to a bearing wall. The columns run all the way through from the upper all the way down to the lower, and there you go. So again, the point of this one is just to be able to look at something that's 2D and think of it in 3D.